The Greyjoys had declared open rebellion, striking first at the Westerlands. It was a bold move, some would say foolish. Did they truly believe they could win against the Seven Kingdoms? Unlikely. Yet, by some miracle or cunning strategy, they had managed to shatter the Lannister fleet. Now, only the royal fleet and the formidable Redwyne fleet stood between them and unchecked dominion over the western coast. If the Ironborn triumphed at sea once more, they'd have free rein to raid and pillage the length of the Westerlands. He didn't know the exact size or strength of the Iron Fleet, but he doubted it could take down both remaining fleets. And even if they did, if they burned every coast from the Reach to the north, King Robert Baratheon wouldn't simply concede defeat. The Iron Islands would never gain independence through force alone. Robert would raise another fleet. The kingdoms would rally. The Ironborn, already despised across Westeros, would be driven back into the sea again and again, until they were broken. A knock disturbed his thoughts. Maester Wolkin entered with parchment in hand. "What are your orders, my lord?" "Send word to the levies and summon our bannermen. They're to gather at Dreadfort within 2 weeks. We march for Winterfell from there." The maester bowed and left. His aunt, Barbary Dustin, turned to him, concern shadowing her eyes. "Who will lead the army?" she asked cautiously. "I will, of course," he replied with a raised brow. "No, absolutely not. I won't allow you to throw yourself into war at your age," she said sharply. "There are seasoned veterans at Dreadfort who fought in Robert's rebellion. They can lead in your stead. You're just 7, the last of your line. No one would fault you for sitting out this war." He listened quietly. Her logic was sound, but he had his own reasons she wouldn't understand. If the North lost, he needed to be there to ensure a proper retreat. If they won, and he suspected they would, he intended to recruit. The Iron Islands were rich in iron ore and boasted the finest shipwrights in Westeros. He'd bring some back to Dreadfort, and there was more. He planned to sell the reforged Valyrian steel blade to Tywin Lannister, and while in Lannisport, quietly lure away talented smiths, miners, woodworkers, and architects. The war was opportunity cloaked in fire and blood. It took him half an hour to wear down Barbary's resistance. He swore he wouldn't join the front lines, only oversee command. She left with a thunderous expression. He knew the coming days would be difficult, but she was family, and he would never use compulsion charms on her. The rebellion also reminded him of a glaring oversight. He had no master of whisperers. For a boy with such ambition, flying blind was dangerous. "One thing at a time," he muttered. Winterfell Castle, Domeric Bolton's POV. Shock didn't begin to describe the reaction of the Northern Lords. A 7-year-old boy, riding atop a black dire wolf, leading 3,000 soldiers. Domeric Bolton's arrival at Winterfell was met with a mix of awe and disbelief. Many lords urged him to return to his keep, declaring the battlefield no place for a child. Lord Rickard Karstark was the loudest, dismissing him outright. But Domeric was not just a child. He was the Lord of Dreadfort, and Lord Karstark would be reminded of that one day. Grim, his dire wolf, was not permitted inside the war tent, nor did he dare use magic to assert dominance. Not here, not in front of so many eyes. He gritted his teeth as the older lords overlooked him, ignoring his insights. They didn't know he had once been a head or a battle-hardened strategist from a very different world. But he would endure. He had endured worse. The northern banners trickled in over the next 2 weeks. He passed the time with Robb and Sansa Stark, subtly weaving compulsion charms into his interactions. Manipulating children left a bitter taste, but Domeric wasn't here to play by the world's rules. He was here to survive, to thrive. Bonding with the future Lord of Winterfell was an investment. Between strategy sessions and quiet spells, he returned to Dreadfort frequently, overseeing the construction of a new port and dispatching 10 trade ships to Lannisport. He would need them soon, for the craftsmen he planned to bring back. His levies, too, were undergoing transformation. He had them drilled in formation and maneuver. These men would form the skeleton of a future standing army. No lord with ambition could rely solely on levies forever. By the time the last northern lord arrived, They began the slow march south toward the Neck. Their destination, Seaguard, where King Robert had assembled a vast host, fresh from routing Balon Greyjoy's eldest son. Domeric Bolton's war had begun, not just on the battlefield, but in every whispered alliance, every ship sent out, and every mind subtly turned toward him. As their army crossed the Neck, news reached them like thunder rolling across a battlefield. Stannis Baratheon, in coordination with the Red Wine Fleet, had led a devastating pincer assault on the Iron Fleet. The result, total annihilation. For all the Ironborn's pride in their seafaring might, it was clear now, the rebellion was already lost. Domeric Bolton knew enough of the Iron Islands to understand their limits. Their warriors may have roared of glory, but they were few in number, poorly armored, and hardly superior to ordinary levies once their ships were taken away. Their strength had always been the sea, and now that strength was broken. He doubted they could raise more than 15,000 men. Robert's host, in contrast, boasted well over 100,000. Without some miraculous advantage, a dragon or divine intervention, Balon Greyjoy's dreams of independence were ashes before they even landed. Still, the northern forces continued their steady march to Seaguard, where King Robert Baratheon had assembled the bulk of his army. When they reached the war camp, Domeric entered the Great Command tent alongside the northern lords. Inside, a large war map stretched across the table, flanked by seasoned commanders and high lords. Robert Baratheon turned from the table as soon as he spotted them. "Ned," he bellowed, face lighting up with unrestrained joy. He strode forward and enveloped his old friend in a bone-crushing embrace. Domeric noted the stiffness in Eddard Stark's posture. The past, Elia Martell, her children, and the aftermath of war still lingered behind the quiet dignity in Ned's eyes. Nevertheless, he bowed his head and knelt before his king, and the northern lords followed suit. "The North and its men are yours, your grace," Ned said solemnly. "Ah, get up, Ned," Robert said gruffly, lifting him to his feet. "You know I hate formalities." The rest of the lords rose. Domeric caught a glimpse of Lord Wylis, Manderly, awkwardly pushing himself upright with visible strain, almost cracking a smile at the sight. Then Robert's eyes landed on him. "You brought your son as well, Ned?" Every eye in the tent turned toward him. Domeric met Robert's gaze without flinching. After a brief pause, he bowed his head and said clearly, "Lord Domeric Bolton, at your service, your grace." "Huh, a Bolton then?" Robert chuckled. "And what happened to your father, boy? Sick, is he?" Domeric's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained calm. "He died leeching himself with a species of leech unknown to maesters. A few moons ago." The tent fell silent for a beat. Then Lord Rickard Karstark burst into laughter. Robert followed suit, his booming guffaw filling the space. A few other lords chuckled nervously, though many remained silent. Ned Stark, Tywin Lannister, Ser Barristan among them. Domeric sighed inwardly. Letting them mock Roose Bolton's death would only be seen as weakness. And weakness invited wolves. He stepped back, arms folded behind him, and summoned his wand with a flick of magic. A sharp, echoing howl pierced the silence outside. Panic erupted beyond the tent walls. Screams and shouts filled the air. Then the tent's flap burst open. Grim, his massive black direwolf, padded in with a low growl. His presence was immediate and terrifying. Several lords stumbled back, Rickard Karstark included, falling flat on his backside. Domeric walked forward calmly, Grim beside him like a living shadow. "You find my father's death amusing, Lord Karstark?" he asked softly, one hand stroking Grim's thick fur. Grim's snarl deepened as he sniffed at Karstark's throat. The older lord was drenched in sweat and trembling. "And no, my lord, I meant no offense," he stammered, face pale as snow. The tent was still as a tomb. After a tense pause, Domeric gave Grim a gentle command. The dire wolf stepped back, though his amber eyes never left Karstark. Domeric turned to Robert, who was visibly unsettled, gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. But to the king's credit, he hadn't wet himself. "Your grace," Domeric said, giving a short bow. Then he climbed onto Grim's back and rode out of the tent without another word. Later that evening, Domeric heard how the encounter had humiliated Ricard Karstark. His sons, Torin and Harion, came to Domeric's camp demanding he face them in a duel or be labeled a craven. The irony of grown men challenging an 8-year-old to single combat didn't go unnoticed. Their fury, meant to reclaim honor, only sank them deeper into ridicule among the other northern lords. It was clear now, House Bolton and House Karstark were on a path of cold enmity, and Domeric was fine with that.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
A few days later, the royal fleet and the Red Wine fleet arrived on the shore of Seagard. From there, King Robert, the rest of his lords, and their men climbed atop the various ships and sailed toward the various islands at the Iron Islands. Once he read the mind of Robert Baratheon, he found the plan made by Robert and the other Lord Paramounts. It was decided that he and his men would go with the king as well as Lord Stark and siege the Pike. And so started a bloody siege that would go on for 2 whole months before Pike finally fell. The Greyjoys lost their rebellion. Balon Greyjoy lost both his older sons during the war and has now surrendered his crown to the Iron Throne. As a punishment, Balon's eldest son was to be taken as a ward so that the Ironborn would think twice about rebelling against the crown the next time. That was all the punishment that the Iron Islanders were going to get. He looked around and could see that all the lords standing there had disgruntled expressions, especially Tywin Lannister, who wanted to make an example of the Greyjoys for having burnt the Lannister fleet. So as soon as Robert stopped talking, he raised his voice and said, "Your Grace, my lords, I know this isn't a place for me to talk, but would you listen to a suggestion of mine?" Everyone was now focused on him. They knew that it was a bit disrespectful to speak after the king had made his decision, but they were curious as well since they were not happy with Robert's decision. Robert snorted at his words. "Go on then, boy. Speak your mind. My lords, the Ironborns have a history of raising, raping, and pillaging our lands. They've been doing it since before Aegon arrived in the Westeros. And they won't stop no matter how many times we defeat them until we do something permanent about this situation." He met Robert's eye and could feel the impatience building in his mind. The only thing Robert wanted to do right now was drink some wine and find a wench to fuck. So he quickly cast a minor calming charm on the fool wandlessly, as well as a compulsion charm, so that the fool would listen to his words. Robert looked like he wanted to say something, but he visibly composed himself and said, "Go ahead then. What do you propose?" The surrounding lords looked a bit surprised that the king would want to listen to the words of an 8-year-old. But they didn't interrupt, so he continued his little speech that would benefit him more than anyone else. "I propose 3 things. First is to send away all the male Greyjoys to the Wall and all the female Greyjoys to the Silent Sisters. Executing them would just make them a martyr for the people who follow the drowned gods. Sending them to the Wall to freeze off their balls would instead make them look pathetic. After all, this is the least amount of punishment Balon and his family should receive for the destruction they have caused to Westeros. And this will also set a future precedent for anyone who even thinks of rebelling against you." Ned looked a little worried at the prospect of sending the 8-year-old Theon Greyjoy to the Wall, but didn't say anything. Tywin had a little gleam in his eyes, even as his face remained stoic, while Stannis, for the first time, looked a little satisfied. The compulsion charm that he had cast on the king, as well as the loyalty charm he had been casting ever since he joined the war, did their work, and Robert nodded at his suggestion. So he quickly went to the second and most important point. The second is to remove all the thralls and salt wives from the islands, and then ban the practice of keeping them as thrall and salt wife. They're just another name for a slave. Without the slaves to mine their iron and grow their food, the Iron Islanders would not be able to gather their strength for a long time. Who knows, they might even learn to sow their own fields. Everyone in the room laughed at his words, while Balon Greyjoy just gave him a venomous glare, which he easily ignored. "But where do you plan to take these thralls and salt wives, boy?" Robert asked. "I doubt anyone else would be keen on giving them shelter in their own lands as their status as slaves. Make them even lower than the small folk in the eyes of other people. Unless you're volunteering to take them to your own lands and feed them yourself. Some of the lords sniggered at that, as it was no secret that northern houses were not as rich as the other southern houses, neither in gold nor in food. But his house was not any other house. "I'll take them," he said, and everyone in the room turned silent at once before Robert settled him with a glare. "Do you know what you're talking about, boy?" the man asked. "There would be a lot of thralls and salt wives in these islands. Do you have any idea how much food and resources it'll take for you to feed these men and women?" Well, if the fat fool is worried about him doing something reckless, that meant at least the loyalty charm was working. He simply nodded his head and said, "A lot. I have no doubt about that. But these thralls and salt wives already know how to work hard, and the North has an abundance of lands. I'm sure that in due time, these people will be able to create their own farms and will be able to support themselves without my help." Robert's face contorted for a bit before he waved his hand away at him. "Very well, then. You can take the thralls and salt wives away from this shithole, and then settle them back into your lands. Stannis, you and Lord Redwine will make sure to transfer those men and women to Dreadfort once you land our army back in Lannisport." "Yes, your grace." Stannis bowed with a stoic face before Robert turned to him once again. Very well then. Very well then. Get on with the third suggestion, boy." He felt slightly irritated at being called a boy again and again, as it brought up memories of another life. But he pushed down on his irritation and said, "I propose that you give the post of the Lord Paramount to someone who believes in making a life with trading rather than by raiding and raping. Someone like that would allow the Iron Islands to stand up on their feet once again and focus on trading, even if only for one generation." Robert stroked his beard for a moment before he nodded. "Aye, that seems like a good idea as well. Lord Tywin, do you know someone like this within the Iron Islands?" Tywin thought about it for a moment before he replied, "House Orkmord is one of the largest houses within the Iron Islands who oppose the old ways, even though they joined Bolton in the end. Making them the Lord Paramount seems as good a decision as any." "Very well then. I'll make him the Lord Paramount of this shit hole once I meet him." "It's decided then." Then he turned to Eddard Stark and said, "Ned, make sure that these Greyjoys are sent to the Wall and their women are sent to the Silent Sisters." "Yes, your grace." Lord Stark nodded before the king bellowed out a laugh. "What are you all still looking at? This meeting is over. Go drink some of the ale, pick up some wench, and enjoy yourself. You deserve some rest after all this bloodshed." And just like that, the Greyjoy rebellion came to an end. Ironlands. POV of Domeric Bolton. Domeric watched with a stoic expression as the various workers climbed on board the royal fleet, which would eventually take them to Dreadfort. As soon as King Robert had finished the war, he started collecting men and women who knew how to build and sail on boats and large ships, because he knew that he would be creating a navy for himself sooner or later. And despite his dislike for the Iron Islanders, it was clear to him that there were very few men in all Westeros who knew more about the ships than these Iron Islanders. After all, they live in an archipelago and have to rely on ships to travel from one island to another whenever they want to leave for another place. So, once he was free to do as he liked, he went with his men and gathered all shipbuilders and other such men from the other islands. Some of them were too old and set in their way of the drowned gods. Even his heavy manipulations with the promise of gold and a good life, as well as the compulsion charms, didn't change their minds, so he left them to their own devices and took all the men that he could. By the end of it all, he had collected some 3,500 men who knew about building and sailing ships, as well as boats, and some 40,000 thralls and salt wives from these lands. As decreed by the king, the royal fleet and Redwine fleet helped him to transfer these men and women to the Dreadfort. Once they landed back in dry land at Seaguard, he told his men to return home with the other men in the Northern Army, while he went to a secluded place and portkeyed back to Dreadfort, where he quickly told his aunt to prepare food and temporary accommodations for the men and women about to arrive in his lands. She was not very happy with such a decision on his part, but he was sure of one thing. There would have been no shortage of miners once these thralls reached Dreadfort. Dreadfort Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. A few days later. "The first batch of grain has been harvested, my lord. Maester Wolkin said as he entered his solar. And he asked while feeding Hedwig with slices of bacon. After all, he had spent a good amount of magic and time in creating those HYV seeds, and it would be rather sad if his hard work bore no result in the end. And the results are amazing, my lord. The farmers you hire to work in your fields have produced 6 times the amount of grain than the other farmers. I see. Send Locke to take the harvest and give each farmer the 200 silver stags, just like I promised, he said, and his aunt frowned from beside him. 200 silver stags. Isn't that a bit too much for a single harvest? His aunt said more than asked. It is. But I want people to know that they'll earn more gold and silver by working for me than they'll do by working on their own, he said as he stood up and looked at the large canals that his people were working on in order to take water from the river to irrigate their fields. It would take some time for these people to increase the size of the canals, so he'll probably have to hire some more men to work in those canals. After all, the more farmers worked for him in these fields, the more grain he'd have. The more grain he had, the more people in his lands would be free to work on other things like building roads, houses, mining, joining the army, etc. The workforce was a very valuable resource to him at the moment, and had to try every possible method that would increase the efficiency of his people. So, I'm assuming that you want to hire more men for other jobs than farming because of the high amount of wheat we harvested? She asked. I do. And I also need to talk with the Hornwoods and negotiate a contract that would allow me to take the timber from their lands. His aunt scoffed at his words. The Hornwoods have never been friends of the Boltons. What makes you think that they'll sign a contract with you? Gold, he said with a shrug. And you know very well that I can be very persuasive when I want to be. His aunt shook her head with mirth in her eyes. Are you sure that you would be able to create better paper than the ones created by the Citadel and the Bravosi guilds? He gave a shrug and said, most likely. There's always the small chance that I'll fail at something, but that chance is rather low. He had the necessary knowledge thanks to the book, paper, and printing, but there was always a possibility of doing something wrong in the process of implementation. So, once you create this paper mill, it will start producing paper, and you'll be able to publish hundreds of books in a day with the help of the printing press. Is that what you're saying? She asked. Yep. It shouldn't be. His words were cut short as he felt something vibrate within his pocket. Who's that? His aunt asked as he took out the mirror. Marion, the captain of the ships that I sent out to Lannisport. He said, he must have reached Lannisport with the rest of the ships. That magical mirror of yours is rather handy, she commented, and he shook his head before he took a deep breath and exhaled. I need to go to Lannisport so I can meet with Lord Tywin Lannister and exchange the Valyrian sword for the men I need. So, wasn't this your plan from the start? She asked, and he shook his head. It was, but I thought that I had more time and would be able to make the deal with the Hornwoods and lead the construction of the paper mill. It seems like I have so much to do and so little time, he said, and let out a sigh before he felt his aunt put her hands on his shoulder as she started massaging him. I can go to Lannisport and deal with Tywin Lannister in your place, she said, but he shook his head. No, this is something I must do on my own, and the Hornwoods would consider it an insult if I didn't go to negotiate with them on my own. He said, I'll do it on my own when I return with the men. Till then, you can focus on hiring more men and increasing the size of the port so that we would be able to dock more trading ships and war galleys there in the future. All right, leave me behind to do all the hard and boring tasks while you gallivant around all over Westeros, she said with no bite in her voice, and he let out a smile before he stood up and embraced her tightly. As an 8-year-old boy, he still only reached her stomach, so she was easily able to wrap her arms around him without any problem. He let out a sigh of contentment as she hugged him tightly. He had never known the love of a mother in his previous life, and this was as close to a mother's love as he could ever be able to receive. So, he basked in the embrace for a long moment before letting her go. I need you to know that I'm very grateful that you're here for me, Annie. Without you, I would be rather lost and would have a far harder time ruling my lands and creating new innovations. She just smiled at his words and cupped his cheeks. It's all right. Family is supposed to take care of each other. He smiled at her before he took out his wand and said, Accio Valyrian sword. The reforged Valyrian sword with an intricately carved pommel in the shape of a lion came flying toward him before he froze it with an arresto momentum and then put it inside his bottomless pouch. I still find it hard to believe you're able to use such magic. The old gods have really blessed you, my nephew. He remembered the heartwood tree that constantly generated the magic and released it in the atmosphere and smiled. That they have. Goodbye, Aunt, he said with a smile. I'll come back within a moon's worth of time. Very well. Stay safe, Dom Eric, she said with a sad smile. And he said, I will, before he activated the port key and landed inside a room in the trading ship that recently landed in Lannisport. Lannisport, POV of Tywin Lannister. Tywin looked at Jaime, who was winning the joust against a knight from House Frye, and had to hold back a smile at the pride he felt for his son. The pride then quickly turned into annoyance as he remembered how his golden heir defied his orders and continued to serve as a glorified guard for another worthless king. Good work, Kingslayer. You showed those Freys what they're made of. King Robert's booming voice entered his ears, and he held back a frown as he saw that the king was already deep in his cups and openly groping a servant girl in front of everyone. The fact that King Robert forced him to host a tourney after the end of the Greyjoy Rebellion was one thing, and that he was not even paying any attention to the tourney was another thing entirely. If he got up and left all of a sudden, it would be seen as highly disrespectful. So he forced himself to sit beside his son-in-law, who was cheating on his wife in full view of everyone else. He was brought out of his thoughts as there was a sudden commotion outside the tourney grounds. He frowned at the screams and yells coming from out there as the guards rushed outside to contain whatever or whoever it was that was making all this fuss. Tyrion, he said in a commanding voice, and the misshapen dwarf whom he had the misfortune to sire turned around to look at him. Tyrion, Tywin Lannister said in a commanding voice, and he turned around to look at his father. Go and check what all this commotion is about, his father ordered, and Tyrion took one last sip from his goblet before he nodded and left the area on his stunted legs. Tyrion cursed his father for disturbing his drinking binge as he moved toward the place where all the commotion was happening. Regardless, he was also curious about all the screaming and shouting that had been going on outside the area until he heard a loud roar, and his feet stopped at once. He was very familiar with that roar from the lions that were caged inside Casterly Rock. Was it possible that some of the lions broke through their cages and came down to Lannisport? That was highly unlikely, as the guards would kill it before it could do too much harm. So, does that mean that a stray lion had entered the Lannisport? That thought was laughable as well. So he shook his head and forced his stunted legs to move faster as he finally reached an area where a lot of small folk had formed a large circle around someone. Excuse me. Move aside, please. Let me through, he said as he carved a path through the people until he finally arrived in a clearing where half a dozen Lannister guard were pointing their spears at a boy riding on top of a lion. Tyrion rubbed his eyes and wondered if he had drunk a little too much before he looked at the scene once again and found that the boy and a lion were still there. No, that was not a lion, but a huge wolf. The boy was looking at the Lannister guards, who were shaking on their feet as the wolf gazed at them. The boy couldn't have been older than 6 to 8 years old, and was wearing a regal-looking, red-colored robe of the finest quality with a weirwood sigil on his chest. When Tyrion saw that sigil, he suddenly understood everything. This was the boy from the north who rode on the back of a giant direwolf. The boy who made that other northern lord piss and shit his pants in fear. The boy suggested ending the House of Greyjoy by sending their men to the Wall and women to the Silent Sisters. The boy, what was his name again? I want to meet with someone who's in charge. Could you lead me to them? The boy's clear yet authoritative voice pierced through all the murmurs and whispers as the guards looked at the boy and wolf fearfully. Tyrion couldn't understand why they were so afraid of the wolf when it was clear that the boy was able to command it, judging by how he easily sat upon its back. I, the guard stammered, and Tyrion felt ashamed on behalf of all the Lannisters and moved forward to introduce himself in case the guards fuck this up. Hello there, my friend. My name is... That was as far as he went before the wolf turned its gaze upon him, and he felt a spike of terror shoot through his heart and froze until the boy put his hand on top of the wolf in a comforting gesture, and it lowered its head in submission. Tyrion took a deep breath and wiped the sweat off his face. all the while thanking the gods that he didn't piss on his britches. That would be rather embarrassing. A lion of the Casterly Rock pissing himself upon meeting a wolf. He turned to look at the boy once again and started to introduce himself once again before the boy cut him off. I know who you are. You're Tyrion Lannister, son of Tywin Lannister and heir of the Casterly Rock. The boy said and gave him a nod, which he returned. That I am, he replied, even if it was unlikely that he'd ever inherit the rock. But I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, my lord. I'm more Domeric Bolton, the boy said before he took out a well-designed golden scabbard from behind himself. The guard standing behind Tyrion tensed upon seeing the scabbard and the sword, but he quickly mentioned them to stay behind and not fuck this meeting up, as he had a feeling that Lord Bolton would not come here without any reason. As for why I came here, the boy said and took out the blade from its sheath, and Tyrion gaped as he saw the rippling effect that was said to be present in all the Valyrian swords. Since when did the Boltons have a Valyrian sword of their own? I heard that your father has been asking around for a Valyrian sword. I wonder, does he still want one? The boy asked, but the smirk on his face clearly showed that he already knew the answer. Why? He gulped and tried once again, yes. My father still wants a Valyrian steel sword for our house. Definitely. Then please lead me to your father, the boy said, and Tyrion nodded quickly before he turned to face the guards who were still pointing their spears at the boy or the wolf and cursed the fools in his mind. Lower your weapons, you fools. This is Lord Bolton, our esteemed guest. He shouted and hoped that the mindless fools wouldn't offend the boy lord. If his father found out that he was about to receive a Valyrian steel sword, but didn't because the guards disrespected the person who wanted to sell him the sword, he doubted that the guards would live to see another day. As he took the boy and the wolf toward the tents outside the tourney grounds, he wondered how much gold his father would pay in order to get the sword for the Lannister house. How much gold do you want for this? Tywin asked as he looked at the beautiful sword in his hands as they sat inside a large tent outside the tourney grounds. It only took a mild legitimacy probe to find out that Tywin was totally spellbound by the sword and wanted it at all costs. But then again, he had pumped Tywin Lannister with compulsion charms, so it was no surprise that the Lord wanted the blade for himself desperately. Not to mention the fact that he had crafted the pommel himself with transfiguration, and it looked very much like a real lion head. There was no way that Tywin wouldn't have liked the sword, even if he didn't use any compulsion charms. But by using them, he made sure that he would get what he wanted from Tywin Lannister. I don't want any gold for the sword, he replied with a smile. Tywin frowned a little at that and turned to look at him sternly. What do you want then? Lands, title, a keep of your own, a marriage with a Lannister. At that moment, he was sure that Tywin would have even given him the hand of his granddaughter Princess Myrcella if he asked for it. But he didn't want to be betrothed to someone at such a young age, especially the princess of the kingdom when he planned to separate himself from the kingdom in the future. No, I don't want any land, title, or something else. But workforce. Workforce? Tywin asked. Yes. Miners, literate men who know how to read and write. Blacksmiths, men who know how to fight and can teach it to others, craftsmen and builders. People like those. Tywin gave him a long, hard look as if he couldn't believe what he just heard before he composed himself and asked, How many of these people do you want? These many, he said, and passed on a slip of parchment to the old lion that was filled with the occupation and number of people that he wanted. Tywin carefully read through the entire letter before he gave him a nod and said, Done. Done. Yes. He opened his mouth to say something before wondering if he kept the numbers too low. He took the page back from the old lion, who looked at him with a raised eyebrow. He then slowly pointed his holly wand at the page and doubled the number of men in each occupation before he pointed it at Tywin and said, Obliviate. Tywin's eyes glazed over for a moment before they returned to their normal color and settled on him as he asked, Where were we again? These are the number of men that I want, he said, and passed on the list to Tywin, who looked at it with a slight frown before he shook his head. I'm afraid I can't provide you with these many blacksmiths. If I did, then Lannisport will have a shortage of them in the near future. The same could be said for shipbuilders. I cannot give you these many of them, as we'll need them in order to rebuild the fleet that we lost to the Ironborn. He gave a nod to the old man and found out that he was telling the truth with a slight legitimacy probe. Oh well, it was negotiation time then. By the end of the negotiation, he had gained more men than he had wanted at the start of his meeting. 1,500 miners, 25 literate men who could read and write, 6 blacksmiths and 10 apprentice blacksmiths, 2 old maesters, 50 architect builders, 500 shipbuilders, 1,000 of the best horses in Westerlands, 10 ships for transport, and 100,000 gold dragons. All in all, it was as good a deal as he was going to get for a Valyrian sword that he didn't need. After the deal was done, he delegated the transportation job to his men and returned to his cabin at the ship before port-keyed himself to Dreadfort. He had a feeling that his Deathly Hallows tattoo was nearly full again, and he wanted to speed up the process as much as he could. Dreadfort Castle. POV of Dom Eric Bolton. A few hours later, Dom Eric was sitting cross-legged at the foot of the heart tree in the Godwoods. He realized that with meditation, he could speed up the magic-absorbing speed of his tattoo, the symbol of Deathly Hallows on the back of his hand. The magic-absorbing speed of his tattoo was double compared to normal times at the moment. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. After a while, he opened his eyes when he felt that burning pain coming from his tattoo. And as expected, when he looked at his hand, he saw that his black and red tattoo was becoming golden again. This time, he decided to do some experiments before going into that endless void. He took 2 pebbles from the ground. He put one of them on his shoulder and threw the other one into the air. After that, he sent his magic to his tattoo. And just like the last time, for a moment, everything went black before his vision came back. He was in the space of endless void again. But this time, before even he had a chance to look around, some information flowed into his mind. It was a piece of information about his tattoo and the reason for his soul coming into this world. And something's finally cleared for Dom Eric. According to this info, he was someone who was chosen by death. He was one of many champions of death that all around the multiverse. As a chosen one, he had some responsibilities and missions. His main mission was to save his world from destruction by killing Voldemort. At this point, Dom Eric, or Harry, was really angry. He lost his parents when he was a baby. He was abused while he was growing up. He found himself in countless near-death situations. He fought in a bloody war. He killed people even if he didn't want to when he was just a teenager. He betrayed. He became numb and finally broken. So, he took his life by walking into the veil. What was it all for? Because he was chosen by death? Why him? Why not anyone else? At this point, Harry really wanted to smash some things, but there was nothing in this place to smash. While Harry was throwing a tantrum about his past life, the info continued to flow, and Harry was chosen by death in his past life and became a champion of death or death champion. As champion, he was given responsibilities and duties. And, of course, if there were responsibilities and duties, there were also compensations and rewards. And his compensation was a new life, which is his life in this world at the moment. A life was given willingly in return for a life taken unwillingly dash. He was chosen by death unwillingly, and his fate, his life changed because of that. So, he lost a life that he should live according to his original fate. But as compensation, he gained a new life after his death that was unbound by fate. A life he can live as he pleases. No responsibilities, duties, or missions. And no saving the world or anything like that. At this point, Harry finally calmed down and started to think rationally again. What is done is done. At the moment, he wasn't Harry Potter anymore. He left this life behind by walking into the veil. In this world, he was Dom Eric Bolton, and there was a whole new life ahead. A life he can live as he pleases. A life for a life. That is just a compensation. Let's wait and see the rewards. And the reward was, well, both surprising and unsurprising. Unsurprising because his reward was the symbol of Deathly Hallows at the back of his hand. Well, it was on his hand, but it bounded to his soul, so even if he lost his hand, he would not lose the symbol. It would just appear somewhere else on his body. It was surprising because it looked like the symbol was more special than he thought. According to info flowing into his mind, the symbol was a magical, sacrificial altar of death. He can receive countless things from it, as long as he sacrifices what is necessary. The good news was he didn't need to sacrifice blood, humans, virgins, or anything like that. The symbol needed only one thing, and that was the magic. Yeah, all he needs is to let it absorb magic from the air, and it is full. He can sacrifice the magic to get items from the void space, or he can use sacrificial magic to upgrade the symbol. For now, as a level 1 altar, the symbol can only give him white orbs. And there will be only one white orb in the void at level 1 when symbol is full. The 3 gray orbs were personal gifts from Death for the beginning of his new life. So, to get the better items, he had to upgrade the symbol. And to upgrade the symbol, he needed magic. A lot of magic to be clearer. To upgrade the symbol to higher levels, he will need more magic. I really need to find a way to create heart trees. Info says that the absorption speed of the symbol changes according to the magic density in the air. So, in a high magic density area, the symbol will absorb magic from the air more quickly, and the time it needs to become full will decrease. Domeric thought about his research and let out a sigh. Should I go beyond the wall to search children of forest? After all, these items and rewards are really attractive. Magical and alchemy items, modern life items, knowledge, power-ups, abilities, resurrecting dead people. Wait, what? It can even resurrect people. Can I resurrect my parents, Sirius, and others as well? Is that even possible? Domeric was bewildered about what he learned just now. Can he really? It should be possible. I should realize this possibility when I saw Hedwig again. I lost her in the past one, but she is now flying around Dreadfort happily. If Hedwig can resurrect, why not parents? He had a purpose in this world now, an ultimate goal. He will resurrect all the loved ones and live happily with them. With a new determination, Domeric looked around and saw a white orb. With a thought, the orb floated and stopped in front of him. He could sense what was inside. It was another book, named Smelting and Forging, a valuable knowledge for him and his lands. But what should I do? I can take the book or upgrade the symbol. The amount needed for the first upgrade is the same as the amount of magic to get a white item. He was caught in a dilemma. No, I shouldn't be short-sighted. Resurrecting people shouldn't be a low-level reward. To get that reward, I need to upgrade the symbol to high levels. And for that, I need a lot of magic, which means I need a lot of heart trees. I'll probably have to go beyond the wall. For that, I need an army, and an army needs weapons and armor. I need to play a long game here to get what I want. With that thought, he reached and grabbed the white orb. Bolton lands. POV of Domeric Bolton. Domeric watched from the distance as his men worked hard to run the paper mill he had designed and created with the help of all the blacksmiths and builders under him. The task was harder than he had initially thought, and there were a few trials and errors in the process. But it was what it was. They finally finished the construction of the paper mill, which started mass-producing paper a week ago. He didn't want to imagine how long it would take if he didn't get the book of paper and printing. Probably, there would be too many trials and errors in the process for his liking. The mill was only being run with the power generated by the water wheels attached to the weeping water. The printing press had also started producing written copies of the books that he wanted to publish before anything else, and he had already realized that they would be needing more printing press in the future, as one machine was not enough. But that was all right. He had not been idle over the past few months and had already designed blueprints for several parts for an advanced printing press that would be able to produce at least 100 books in a single day. The machine just needed to be assembled properly, and he would have to do that task on his own in case someone else didn't fuck it up by mistake. He brought out of his musings as he heard footsteps from behind him and turned to face the maester, who seemed rather excited by something. "Maester Rhine," he said with a nod as the man neared him. This was one of the maester that Tywin gave to him in exchange for the Valyrian sword. The man was fiercely loyal to Tywin when he first came here and was sent here with the intention of spying on his lands. But the loyalty charms soon turned his allegiance to House Bolton, just as it did to everyone else who was loyal to House Lannister or any other house that was not House Bolton. Because of his chain links, he had given the man the specific role of focusing on the food supply within this region. And he was happy to find that the man was more than competent at his job. "My lord," The third batch of the harvest has arrived, the man said with excitement, and he gazed patiently at the man. It's a bumper harvest, my lord. The amount of grain that arrived this time was 9 times more than a normal harvest. This is a huge improvement, my lord. The seeds that you distributed worked wonders, my lord. I've never seen something like that in my life. He hummed as he thought about the numbers in his head. And how much of that grain would we need, Maester Rhine? He asked, and the man put his hands inside his pocket and took out an account book that was filled with so many numbers that he received a headache just by looking at it. Maester Rhine, I don't need an exact number. Just tell me what you can from the top of your mind, he said, and the man stood still for a moment and put on a thinking expression before he smiled. Some 28 to 31% of the food, if we don't count the miners and other builders. And some 38 to 41% if we do. He explained. So, we only need about 40% of our food in order to feed our people, he asked, and the man nodded quickly. And we don't need to buy food from the southern kingdom ever again. No, my lord. In fact, we have enough food now that we can even be able to sell it to the other lords in the north. Do you want to sell it to others, my lord? It will provide an excellent source of income for you if you do. No, he declined without a second thought. Save all the food we have for now. We'll only start selling the food we have to the other lords once we have enough food to last a 6-year-long siege. As you wish, my lord. The maester bowed to him. If there is nothing else, my lord. No, but send Master Tobo Mott to me, he said, and the man nodded once again before leaving. A few minutes later, another haggard and dirty-looking man covered in soot from head to toe entered the room and bowed to him. Master Tobo Mott, have you started the construction of the blast furnace? He asked while looking at the men working in the paper mill. Yes, my lord, though I've never seen something like this, and am not sure if this will work or not. It will, believe me, he said, and was about to remind the man to hurry for its construction when his aunt arrived beside him. Auntie, he said with a warm smile, which she returned in kind before looking pointedly at the blacksmith standing behind him. Keep up the good work, Master Tobo Mott. You may leave now, he said, and the man gave a deep bow before leaving. I still don't believe the fact that you managed to snatch the best blacksmith from King's Landing, she said with some amusement. There was a time when there were only 2 blacksmiths in Dreadfort. Now I've lost count. 13, he replied. There are 13 blacksmiths in the castle, and 26 apprentices, 2 for each master blacksmith, though some of the apprentices are good enough to be called masters in their own right. And even they are not able to exhaust the supply of iron that we have now. She lamented, and he raised an eyebrow at her. You're not here to complain about the pig iron once again, are you? He asked with some amusement, and she frowned before turning to face him. And what's wrong with complaining about it? We have 19 operating mines in our lands. 19, and 14 of those mines produce iron. The blacksmiths do what they can to produce armor, weapons, as well as steel plows, and the other things that you want them to produce for the small folk. But even they're only capable of using a small amount of the iron that we produce. The rest of it is gathering dust in our warehouses. What do you plan to do with all the pig iron, Dom? Why don't you just sell it to the other houses? I, for one, know that the Mandaleys and Karstarks would definitely buy as much of it as you could throw at them. I won't throw anything at the Karstarks, he said with a hint of warning in his voice. Ever since the end of the last war, the relationship between his house and the Karstarks has continued to deteriorate to the point that Karstarks have even started sending some of their soldiers masked as bandits to harass his peasants. They may irritate him for now, but once he creates his army, he will destroy any bandits that they send in his lands. And I told you that we'll have a use of the iron in the future. You keep saying that. But when? When the time we can construct the blast furnace. He explained, we'll have no more discussion about this, Annie. Plus, it's not like we're lacking gold at the moment. And if my idea fails, which it won't, then I'll simply follow your words and sell all the iron to other houses in North or some houses even in the Vale and Riverlands. Very well then. Still, just because we have gold right now doesn't mean that we should take it for granted. The sooner we start making an earning from our businesses, the better. He gave a nod to her, but he already knew that if he started selling the excess food, iron, weapons, armors, silver, from the mines and the books that the printing press was producing, then he would easily be able to get a good amount of gold each month. But he was in no hurry, especially as his mind focused on something else these days. "How is the work in the port going, Andy?" he asked. "Slowly as ever," she replied. "Because of all the things that you continue to import from the other kingdoms in Essos, there is already a huge village forming near the port, which would soon turn into a town. We'll have to make a plan for the town that's about to form near the port, or it'll turn into a huge disaster like King's Landing." "I know," he replied. "I've already sent Maester Devon to 500 men with a plan for the new town. He'll take care of it. And if he can't, then you'll go and deal with the situation. You can go to the port and take a look at the situation yourself." She commented, "With your powers, it won't even take you a single second to do so." "I know that. Of course I do. But I'm too preoccupied with something else these days and don't want to divert my focus too much." "Preoccupied with what?" "You spend all your time these days with the weirwood trees." She japed and started laughing on her own before she realized that he was not laughing along with her. "Dumb. Why do you spend all your time in the godswood these days?" she asked with slight concern in her voice. He wondered if he should evade her question, but then decided that if he couldn't be honest to his only family member, then who else could he trust? "The heartwood tree," he began. "I told you that it released magic to the air, which allows me to use magic, didn't I? Well, normal weirwood trees are not capable of doing it. I want to understand how the children carve the faces on weirwood trees, which turn them into heartwood trees, but I've not been able to figure out the trick so far." They both remained silent for a long moment before she finally asked, "And what do you plan to do about it?" "I could try to understand how the whole face carving thing works and spend an unknown amount of time failing at it," he said in a sarcastic voice. "Or I could go north of the wall in order to find the children of the forest if they have not already gone extinct." The man jolted awoke at once and looked around frantically before his eyes set on him. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" the man shouted, probably hoping to alert the guards who stood outside his bedroom. At the same time, he put his hands below his pillow, took out a dagger, and pointed it at him. Unfortunately, his voice would never carry outside his room, and the guard would never even know that he was attacked in his own bedroom. Peter Baelish looked a little worried when none of the guards outside came in, but regained his confidence when he looked at Demeric's body structure. "You're a boy. A mere boy. Who sent you? Was it Varys? And where are my guards?" "Guards!" he shouted, but none came. Thankfully, the man was too cautious to attack him, which was a good thing for him. He really didn't want to brawl with the man. He had more important things to do. "Is that a Valyrian steel dagger?" he commented as he noticed the ripples in the knife that Littlefinger was pointing at him. "Good. It's always good to have more Valyrian steel. Who knows, I might collect enough of these small daggers and trinkets to create another Valyrian steel sword," he mused to himself. Then he pointed at the dagger and said, "Accio," and the blade flew from Peter's hands into his. Then did the same thing for the dagger's sheath. He sheathed the dagger and put it into his bottomless pouch, then gazed back at Peter, who was suddenly looking very worried at his blatant use of magic. Who are you?" he stammered out in fear. But he was not here to listen to Littlefinger's ramblings. "Imperio," he said, and the man's expression suddenly went slack, and his eyes developed a slight haze. "Good. Now, give me the names of all the girls you have that are excellent at spying." "Lana, Tara Mare." "Wait, stop. Write down the names on a parchment." Peter followed his command, did as he was told, and handed him a list filled with a dozen names. "Good," he commented. "Now give me the name of someone who could run a spy network for me. Someone who would be able to become a master of whispers with enough funding and resources." "Chitaya," Peter said without waiting for a second. "Very well." He pointed his wand, and the name was written on the parchment. "Now tell me how you run your network of spies. And tell me everything, as well as any suggestions you might have of your own, especially the thing you will do if you have more resources." "Yes," Peter said, and went ahead to explain to him how his whole spy system worked in detail. By morning, the most important girls working in Peter's brothel were missing, as well as his Valyrian steel dagger and the 300,000 gold dragons he had managed to steal away from the crown over the past year. Red Keep, POV of Domeric Bolton. Next day, Petri Ficus Totalis, Domeric Incantate, and petrified the queen of the realm, Cersei Lannister. After dealing with Peter Baelish yesterday, he decided to get some information from the small council members to learn more about the realm and find out some dirty secrets. He gained lots of things from the 2 visits he made to Littlefinger. So he went to Red Keep secretly and used legilimency on the small council members. The last person he read his mind was Jon Arryn, the King's Hand. After a deep search in Jon's mind, he found a piece of shocking information about Queen Cersei Lannister and Kingsguard Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer and brother of the Queen. Jon didn't have concrete evidence yet, but was investigating the subject and was pretty sure he was right. And for Domeric, this was enough reason to investigate the situation himself. After all, if Jon is right, then it means this realm was fucked up. Like really, most likely, a civil war was inevitable. So, that was the reason why Domeric was in the Queen's chamber and why he petrified her. He wanted to learn the truth from the main source. Legilimens. After a deep mind reading, he left her mind. But he didn't like what he saw there. What a selfish, manipulative bitch. I should stay away from her as much as I can. This kind of people brings nothing but trouble and destruction to people around them. Aside from the Queen's selfish, manipulative, and incestuous behaviors, he also saw her concern about her son, Prince Joffrey. According to what he saw, Joffrey was on his way to becoming the next Mad King. Or maybe Sadist King would be more suitable for him. Looks like I need to visit Prince as well and confirm the situation about him. But really, what kind of realm is this? If the taboo between Quinn and her brother becomes public knowledge, then a civil war will break out. And if their secret stays hidden, the realm will be ruled by a Mad King. Yeah, this realm totally fucked up. He looked at the Queen with disgust before raising his wand again. Obliviate, stupefy, finite. He left the Queen's chamber after wiping her memory, putting her to sleep, and lifting the petrifying charm. He arrived at the prince's chamber after a while and repeated the process. And he became sure that if Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, the realm would be ruled by a sadist and Mad King. If it were up to him, he'd prefer the civil war over the Joffrey rule. After all, with war, there would be opportunities that he could take advantage of. But with a king like Joffrey, everything would be problematic and unsatisfactory. Well, he didn't have any intention to meddle with the royal family's problems. Civil war or Mad King. As long as he prepared for both situations, he can sit back and watch the show, as well as take some advantage if the opportunities arise. I didn't know that we were going to King's Landing in order to steal women and little boys. Euron Greyjoy, or Merlin, as it's now called, said with a laugh, and Domeric rolled his eyes as the half-demented pet gazed lustfully at the women. They're not here for the reason you think, Merlin, he said before he thought about it, and said, oh well, the women are whores. You're correct in thinking that. But I've not brought them on board for that purpose. Neither are the boys for that purpose either. Then what? You want to marry them? Merlin asked sarcastically. No, they'll build a spy network for me. He explained to the man whom he had saved from freezing off at the wall a few months ago. Despite his sadistic tendencies, Domeric had no doubt that Euron Greyjoy was one of the best sea captains in the Westeros. That is why he rescued the man from freezing off at the wall and took his time to make sure that the man was loyal to him. Then he used some high-level transfiguration to grow his missing left eye, as well as change his face to a degree that no one else would ever be able to recognize him as Euron Greyjoy. And now the man worked as his fleet admiral. Not that he had much of a fleet at the moment, but he'll have one in the future. Spy network. The man spat before his mind started working a mile a minute, and he nodded reluctantly. I guess such a thing would be useful to you. Unless you can use your magic and find out about everything that goes around in the Seven Kingdoms. No, if could do that, then why would I waste my time in building a spy network? He asked, but then gestured for the man to stop talking, take care of these girls, and travel to Myr next. From there we'll go to Tyrosh and Lys. As you say, my lord. Merlin bowed deeply, though he could feel the sarcasm dripping out of each word that he said. Apparently being loyal to him didn't mean that Merlin would stop using his unwanted sarcasm at him. Report to me once you reach your destination. He ordered, and Merlin gave him a nod. And what'll you be doing until then? Murin asked. You're not even old enough to wet your cock on a nice and wet pussy. No, and it's a damn good thing. Otherwise, I would be rather distracted with all the pussies that are being offered to me these days. He said no. I'll be planning for the expedition at the north of the wall. Don't see what you find so tempting that you would be willing to freeze off your balls in that desolate land. But it's your funeral. Murin joked, and he rolled his eyes before he said goodbye and portkeyed back to Dreadfort. Dreadfort Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. How are the troops coming along? He asked Walton as they looked at the 1,000 men running laps around Dreadfort early in the morning, just before dawn. It was rather cold outside, but these men needed to prepare for cold if they were to be of any use to him at the north of the wall, the true north. They aren't worth the food they eat. Walton grunted. Domeric almost let out a sigh at the man's bluntness and his bad review of the men he was training. Because regardless of what Walton said, a simple use of legitimacy told him that the men were coming along well and that Walton was secretly rather proud of them. How long until they're ready for the expedition north of the wall? He asked. You're too impatient. Walton retorted without any heat in his voice. He felt that he needed to chastise the man, but then he realized that Walton was not wrong in saying that. Yes, I'm a bit impatient. Things are always so slow in this world. He murmured to himself and lamented the time it took for things to happen in this world. Even traveling from Dreadfort to Winterfell took a whole week of his time if he didn't use magical means of transportation. A journey that would have hardly taken a day for a modern-day human with access to a car or a bike. Don't worry. Give them 2 moons worth of time, and they'll be ready for the expedition. And if they're not, he asked, then they'll die. Walton said in his brutally honest way, with a shrug, as if the lives of these men weren't worth a damn. But he couldn't blame Walton for that kind of thinking when more than 95% of lords and ladies think the same way when they look at the small folk. Something that would only change once he started educating the small folk. And that was not going to happen in a fortnight. Did Lord Stark reply to my message? He asked his aunt, who had remained strangely silent up until this point. Maybe because she was pissed that he woke her up so early in the morning. Yes. He asked for the reason behind your expedition. His aunt replied frostily, and he added, waking her up in the morning, to his list of things that he would not repeat again. Then send him a letter and tell him the reason behind the expedition. He said, and could see Walton trying to listen to their talks. It was understandable, as aside from him and his aunt, no one else knew why he was preparing for the expedition to the north of the wall. The real reason. His aunt's gaze fell back upon him as she scrutinized him for a long moment before she asked, Are you sure? I don't think Lord Stark would believe us if that's what we tell him. And even if he did, he'll likely think of us as fools more than anything else. Let him think what he will about us, as long as he permits us to travel north beyond the wall. He said without any worry. And if he doesn't, she asked, then I'll pay him a visit myself. I replied, but he knows better than to deny me my request, especially when I named his son Bran Stark my heir in case I perish north of the wall. He could see that his aunt was worried about him. So he simply put a hand on her hands and gave her a sweet smile. Don't worry. You know what I'm capable of. And we both know that nothing will happen to me. Do we? She asked as her worry turned into anger at his reckless behavior. Yes. Even if we are ambushed by the wildlings north of the wall, I'll just use my portkey to come back here, I said with a smile, and she gave him a hesitant nod, which was followed by a shaky smile. As we were talking, the recruits, quite a few of them were the veterans of the Greyjoy Rebellion and Robert's Rebellion, finished their lap across the Dreadfort, and were then drilled even further by Walton and his men. Any other news for me, Annie? He asked, and she gave him a nod before she climbed on top of her horse and told him to follow her. He gave a nod, climbed back on Grim's back, and followed behind her as she led him toward the section of the river where he had built the water wheels and the blast furnace. You were right, she said after a long silence, as they reached the large furnace that was empty at the moment. So, they completed it? He asked after a long silence, and the look on her face, which reminded him of someone who had eaten a sour lemon, made him laugh at her. They did, she said bitterly. The first day, when Master Tobo Mott ran the furnace, he produced 40 steel ingots within 6 hours. 40 steel ingots. Can you believe that? She asked with a slight fascination, and he had a feeling that she had a love-hate relationship with the blast furnace. Love because of how beneficial it was for them. Hate because it proved her wrong. And despite all her good qualities, he knew that his aunt was a woman who could hold her grudge for a long time over really petty matters. So instead of egging her on, he simply gave a nod and asked, "How many steel ingots have they been producing every day since then?" "About 150 steel ingots over 3 shifts per day," she replied curtly. And the quality of that steel?" he asked. "I don't know much about such things, but Tobomot informed me that the steel produced here is even more sturdy than castle-forged steel. Armor and weapons made from it will be highly sought after once they are released to the market." "I see," he said, and hummed a little before asking, "I believe that even all the blacksmiths in the castle combined are not able to deplete our steel ingot supply." She laughed at his words. It was not a derisive laugh, but a laugh filled with amusement. "No, they're not even able to finish 1/3 of the steel ingot that we produce every day. And now, instead of pig iron, our warehouses are filled with high-quality steel." "Not for long," he replied, and she looked at him with a raised eyebrow, asking him what he meant by those words. And he smiled back at her before taking out a parchment from his bottomless pouch and giving it to her. She unrolled the parchment and looked at the diagram drawn in it before she looked back at him once again. "I don't understand what it is. I can see that it will be using the power from the river, judging by the water wheel drawn in it. But I don't know what the rest is all about." She returned the parchment to him. "You might as well tell me what that is." "It's a water wheel-powered hammer," he replied. "The water wheel will supply the power to raise the large hammer before letting it fall on the steel ingot. This will save the blacksmiths hours of time in forging armor and swords along with other equipment. It'll definitely take some time for them to set up this design and even more time to get used to it, but in the end, it'll increase the supply of steel product created by us by a huge amount." As he finished, he could see that his aunt was enamored by the whole idea. After all, high-quality steel was more valuable than pig iron, and high-quality weapons and armor were more valuable than high-quality steel ingot. The more armor and weapons that they produce in Dreadfort, the more easily they'll be able to arm their men. And once they've armed all their men properly, they'll be able to sell the remaining steel products to the other houses, gaining more gold, which will lead to more prosperity. She was right in her views, in a way, except for the fact that even if gold did bring prosperity to the people of a kingdom, there were other ways to make a place more prosperous. "Give it to Master Tobomot when he wakes up in the morning," he said. "He'll understand what to do with the design." His aunt gave a nod and then carefully pocketed the design in her pocket as he wondered how long it would take for the blacksmiths to forge these water wheels. Maybe a month, maybe less, maybe more. The point was that when it does, he'll start making steel plows and other such things for the small folk in huge quantities so that they'll be able to increase their harvest even more in the future. That would definitely be more useful to him than making weapons and selling them to other houses. "You're leaving already?" his aunt asked sadly, and he realized that he had indeed not spent a lot of time with her since the start of the Greyjoy Rebellion. "Yeah, sorry about that, Annie," he said with a bitter smile, but knew that he needed to leave in order to search for children of forest or information about how to create heart trees. He also planned on searching for priceless artifacts like Valyrian steel blades and dragon eggs once he was out there on a search, but knew that he had to use his magic wisely, as there were very few weirwood trees in the world right now. Regardless, having a simple breakfast with his aunt wouldn't delay him too much. Beautiful girls, little boys, and now old men. Is there no end to your perversions? Murin asked as Domeric deposited the last glassmaker in the ship, infiltrating Mir's glass facilities and stealing their formula, and these men had been a hard task for him. But he had done it. A short while ago, he gained the book of glass making from his altar tattoo as a reward. He hesitated a little, but decided to choose the book over upgrading the tattoo. If he upgrades the tattoo, he could get more valuable green items or rewards the next time the tattoo becomes full. But there was a problem. A higher level tattoo meant a higher level of magic capacity, which also meant he would have to wait much more for the next sacrifice for items. So he decided to upgrade his tattoo after finding a way to create more heart trees. Also, glass was a rarity in this world and thus very valuable. So, making glass meant that he would gain prestige across the world and the prosperity of their land would increase. And more prosperity meant attracting people. Peasants seeking a more comfortable life and merchants seeking more profits would flock to his lands, which is what exactly he needed at the moment. And after seeing how they made their glass, he was sure that he could make better ones. He was also sure that by doing so, he would be declaring himself an enemy of the Magisters of Myr. But you cannot befriend everyone. And if he wanted to bring reform in this world, then he'd probably step on a lot of toes. This fact was insinuated when Citadel and Faith filed their complaints against him in the small council, because his cheaper and higher quality books led to them not being able to sell most of their own books. The High Septon even had the audacity to ask him for the design of the printing press for the Faith so that they would be able to spread the message of God to more people. So now that you're here, what else do you want from Tyrosh and Lys? Murin asked curiously. The man was no doubt a sadist and a psychopath, but as long as Murin was loyal to him, it was okay. There are many slave fighting pits in Tyrosh, and some of them have people in them that have been fighting in those pits for years. People who are experienced in the art of killing. People who I could use. So, you want the slaves to fight for you instead? Murin asked in amusement, and he gave a curt nod. Of course, he did not doubt that he'd have to use a lot of imperius and compulsion charms to buy or steal those experienced fighting slaves. But it was a price he was willing to pay for good sworn shields. Free City of Tyrosh, Essos. POV of Domeric Bolton. Once they reached Tyrosh, it took him and his crew a whole week to find all the top gladiators in Tyrosh. What do you think about his skills? Murin asked, and he shook his head. He is very skilled. Probably one of the best fighters I've ever seen, if not the best. I want him to become my sworn shield and my mentor for swordsmanship, he said as he looked at the middle-aged man who was dual-wielding 2 swords in the arena against 3 people at once. The man named Varco was one of the gladiator champions in the fighting pits and had been fighting for 5 years in the pits. The fact he was still alive and kicking even after 5 years of continuous fighting showed just how good of a fighter he was. I've seen Jaime Lannister and Barristan the bold fight once. Murin mused to himself. I would say that this guy is as good as them. Are you sure? He asked skeptically, and Murin nodded confidently. Good. That means I can make him the best fighter in the Westeros with some resources. How much will the Tyroshi Magisters ask for him if I wanted to buy him? He asked, and Murin instantly shook his head. They would not sell such a champion to anyone. Murin said, but what if they did? Humor me. Between 800,000 to 1 million gold dragons, if I must guess. Murin said. His jaw almost dropped at that number. How the fuck does a single slave sell for that much? I know what you're thinking, Murin said with a smirk. But look at all the people in the arena. Most of them have come here to see their champion fight against high odds and get his victory regardless. I see, he said as he looked at the tens of thousands of men and women shouting for blood as Varco played with the last man remaining in the arena. So kidnapping it is. Yup, as if the Tyroshi Magisters would have ever given us anything cheaply. Very well, you were right. I was wrong. Now tell me about the other gladiator champions in these fighting pits that I might be interested in. He asked as he cast a tracking charm on Varco and left the pits along with Murin. There is this woman, Murin said as they walked out of the pits. Her name is Raxa the Giant. And you'll not believe me, but she is almost as big as the mountain. He turned to look at Murin after those words, and the ship captain gave him a shrug. Don't look at me. I was as surprised as you were when I first heard about her. She has been in these pits for 7 years. Though some people even say that she's half mad. So I don't know how useful she'll be to you. I'll find some use for her, he said as they went into an alley, an apparat back. Varco was sleeping on his straw mattress and thinking about the life he had lost 5 years ago when he was caught by the slavers and sent into these pits. He looked at the locket given to him by his beloved. She was probably already happily married to someone else by this point, but he couldn't help but think of her even now. To be frank, not her, but his life before the pits and his freedom. The locket was the only thing that reminded him of the freedom he had once. And without it, he would truly have lost all will to live by now. Thankfully, he had managed to hide the locket from slavers when they stripped him naked and searched his whole body by eating it and vomiting it out when it was safe to do so. He was thinking about the fight he'd have to participate in within a few days. There was nothing else to do in this cell. He tried not to think about his freedom or future, because he knew what would come after hope: pure desperation. In desperation, he would lose his will to live and perish in the pits. He doesn't want to die yet. He wants to live. Then he heard a large explosion at the other end of the fighting pits. He quickly got up from the mattress and looked outside from his prison cell, but couldn't make out anything except for the red hue above the building, denoting that the explosion had probably led to the fire. Just as he was thinking what could have happened, their second and a third explosion shook the place, and the guards looking over them either ran to subdue the fire or escape with their own lives. "Hey, wait!" he shouted desperately as he caught one of the fleeing guards. "What about us? We'll die if we remain here." "None of my business, scum." The guard shouted back and slammed him with the back of his spear before escaping on his own. He felt a slight concussion in his head and raised his head to see the fire coming closer to them as the heat within his prison cell rose to a higher degree, and he started looking around for a way to get out of this place when he heard a voice. "Do you want to leave this place?" The voice was so calm and so out of place that he instantly stopped what he was doing, looked at the source of the voice, and was a little disgruntled when he found himself looking at a 9 to 10-year-old boy. "Get out of here, boy, or you'll die along with us." He snarled and was a little surprised at the little humanity that he was able to show despite how many people he had killed to this day in the fighting pits. "I asked you a question. Do you want to leave this place?" The boy asked once again, ignoring the heat easily, even though he himself was starting to sweat profusely because of it. Only then did the words of the boy register in his mind, and he quickly ran toward the bar of his prison and asked the boy in a desperate voice, "Can you free me?" The boy gave him a nod and said, "If you promise to serve me for a year, then I'll free you." He thought about the boy's words for a moment and realized that being a slave to a boy for 1 year was definitely better than being a slave to the magisters for his entire life, and quickly gave him a nod. The boy gave him a nod of his own before handing him a piece of wooden amulet, and his heart plummeted. "What is this?" he asked, losing all the hope he had gained so far. So, the boy didn't plan on freeing him and was just playing with him until now. "It's a port key," the boy replied in a perfectly calm voice as the fire started getting closer to them. "Now hold it and say, 'Back to ship.'" "What? Just say 'back to ship,' Dad," the boy said calmly, and he wondered if the boy was crazy or what. "Just do it," the boy said, and he finally had had enough, so he threw the wooden amulet down on the floor and snarled at the boy. "No, I've had enough of your games, boy. So, either let me out of this place or leave." The boy looked at him silently for a long moment before he finally shrugged his shoulders. "Very well. You leave me with no choice then." Then a stick appeared at the boy's hand, and he pointed the stick to him. "Imperio." All of a sudden, his mind dulled, and he felt a sense of calmness wash over him. Then the boy said something, and the idea of picking up the wooden amulet, or port key, as the boy called, it seemed rather good. So he picked up the stone and repeated the phrase that the boy had told him about, and the next moment, he felt something pull at him at the navel and felt himself being squeezed through a thin tube, and then he promptly arrived in a dark prison cell. "What?" was as far as he went before his mind cleared, and he emptied his lunch on the floor. "You're right. She is half mad," Domera commented as he watched the 8-foot-tall woman snarling at him from inside her prison cell as she tried to bite through the steel bar. It had come to him as a huge surprise when she had initially been able to bend the steel bars out of shape, and he had to quickly stun the woman so that she wouldn't escape her cell. Then he transfigured the bars back to their original shape and cast the unbreakable charm on it. Now she was no longer able to bend the bars with her pure strength. But that didn't stop her from trying. You sure you still want it?" Mirren asked, "because I'm sure that we'll be able to sell it to the other slavers at a very hefty sum." "She's a her, not an it. And yes, I'm very good at mind arts, and will be able to heal her with enough time," he said as he then turned to the next cell, where Varco was quietly sitting in his new bed and staring at him. "You promised to serve me for 1 year in exchange for freeing you from the fire. He said, I did, but I didn't know that you were a Meggie. The man said with a snarl. Clearly, he had some prejudice against mages and wizards from this world. And if what he had heard about these Meggie warlocks was correct, then he didn't blame the man. So, you plan on breaking our agreement? He asked, and Varco stared back at him for a long time before he shook his head. No, a deal is a deal. I'll serve you for a year. Then use your blood and thumb to sign this contract, he said, and gave a piece of paper to the man, who scrutinized it for a moment with a frown. I can't read. What does it say? He asked. It says that you'll serve me faithfully for a year. And if you betray me during that time, then you'll forfeit your life, and the magic in the contract will kill you. The man looked a bit disconcerted for a time before he finally let out a sigh in defeat and bit his thumb before using the blood and thumb to sign it. Good. Now I just need to repeat this process a few dozen times more, he said with sarcasm as he looked at the other cells, which were filled with gladiators from the slaver's pit. None of them were as good as Varco or Raxa the Giantess, but they were still far better than any average knight in the Westeros. And once he arms them with magically charmed weapons and armor, they'll be a force to be reckoned with. But first, he must win their loyalty, which would mean spending a good amount of time among these people. Oh well, he was sure that he'd be able to find some time for them. And he had to heal Rax's mind sooner or later, so why not do it now? Free City of Lys. POV of Domeric Bolton. It took them another moon's worth of time to reach Lys. Then 2 more weeks to find the best pleasure slaves that were also smart enough to gather information for him. During their time here, he also bought any slave who was literate, because sooner or later, he'd open a school for his troops and the small folk. So, he wanted as many teachers in his hands as possible. Not to mention that as his lands advanced, he'd need more educated people who would be able to follow his orders written on parchments. Aside from that, Aunt Barbary called him with a mirror and told him that Lord Stark had permitted him to go on an expedition north of the Wall. Now, he only needed to get the permission of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and he knew exactly how to do it. So, it shouldn't be a problem. As for the gladiator slaves that he rescued from the slaver pits in Tyrosh, they have all signed the contracts with their blood and won't be able to betray him without losing their lives. The constant use of compulsion charm has also made them more amiable to his suggestions, as well as more loyal to him. He was certain that by the time he reached back home, all these men and women would become loyal to him and wouldn't try to leave even when he gave them their freedom. There was also the headache that he was suffering because of Raxa. After reading her mind, he quickly understood why she had gone half mad. The reason for that was that she was sold to a house of freaks at a very young age by her parents because of her being far taller than any girl had the right to be. Then, before she was even 10 years old, she was captured by slavers and raped repeatedly by them before being sold to pleasure houses that catered to the needs of men with different tastes. But once she grew up and people found out about her immense strength, she was once again sold as a gladiator to the fighting pits. The truth was that Raxa was only 22 years old at the moment. That someone so young to suffer so many cruelties in her life saddened him to no end. He'd already erased a good portion of her memories, which led to deep trauma in her mind. The unintended side effect was that Raxa's mind had once again turned into that of an 8-year-old child's mind. Imagine that. An 8-foot-tall woman with the mind of an 8-year-old girl. Thankfully, she had spent 7 whole years fighting in the pits, so she was able to regain back her fighter's instincts after a bit of sparring with Varco, the only man on the ship who was able to provide her with a challenge. At least she was not half mad anymore. Now he just had to teach her not to hug him fiercely, or one day she might break all the bones in his body. You've talked with the Umbers already, I take it? He asked as he climbed on the back of his faithful dire wolf. Even though it was only a magical construction, he had grown attached to it. Yes, Small John will meet you near their border and will lead you toward the wall, she said as she looked at him with worried eyes. Do remember to stop at the last hearth and dine with Grey John for a little while at least. He gave a nod, but the worried look on her face didn't go away. She was a bit of a worrywart, but he couldn't blame her. If he had a son who wanted to go north of the wall with 1,000 men in order to search for children of the forest and giants, as well as direwolves and wargs, then he would be worried too. Don't worry, Aunt. I'll be fine, he said, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder to reassure her when he heard loud footsteps coming from behind him. Dom, Dom, how do I look in my new dress? Dom. He looked back and found Raxa, the giantess, posing for him in the white woolen military dress that he had given to each and every one of his men to fight the cold in the north of the wall. Yes, Raxa, you look very pretty, he said with a smile, and she smiled back while showing all her crooked teeth, and he let out a grimace at the sight. Years of fighting the fighting pit had cost her a fair bit of her teeth, a problem that he intended to deal with very soon. After all, she was his sworn shield as well as someone he cared about, so he'll make sure that she at least looks presentable. I do, don't I? She said, and moved forward to hug him and missed as he ducked out and escaped at the last moment. Raxa, what did I tell you about hugging me? He asked, and she looked horrified for a moment before she pouted and her lips quivered slightly, showing that she was about to cry, and his heart melted right then and there. He had no idea how it happened, but over the past few months, he had come to care for this giantess a good deal and almost saw her as a little sister, even though there was nothing little about her. Now, it's all right, he said, and went forward and hugged her in the waist. You can hug me, but only very lightly. Okay. She put her hands gently around him as if he was a piece of fragile glass and nodded her head, okay. Then she smiled once again. Let's go, Dommy. I want to see the giants that you told me about, she said, and started pulling him away, and it took a while for him to calm her down. She has been rather excited to meet the giants that live in the north of the wall ever since he told her about them. As he once again climbed on the back of Grim, he looked back at his aunt, who was looking skeptically at Raxa with a worried expression, wondering if the giant woman was more likely to kill him rather than save him. Don't worry, Aunt. It'll be all right, he said, and hoped that he looked more confident than he felt. At that moment, Walton rode on his horse and stopped beside him. Are you sure you want to take that giant woman with you? The man whispered in his ears, and he gave a nod. Very well, then. All the men and supplies are ready. We're prepared to move. Just give the order. He gave Walton a nod and looked back at the 1,000 men who had trained extensively for the past 6 months for this expedition. All of them were wearing white fur and thick clothes in order to deal with the weather in the true north. Each of them also had a spear and a short sword with enough training to deal with any wildling in the hostile region they were going into. Every 5 men in the group were given a northern horse that they would use to carry around their food and supplies. He was doubtful that they would find food in the true north, so they had to go prepared. And if they ran out of food, then they'd just have to butcher the horses and eat them. Very well, then. Send the scouts ahead of us, and then give them the order to start moving, he told Walton before he bid one last goodbye to his aunt and left the gates of Dreadfort with 1,000 men marching behind him as Varco and Raxa moved beside him on their own horses as his sworn shields. It took a fortnight for them to reach Last Hearth because of the slow marching speed of his man. He stayed one night at the Last Hearth. When Lord Umber asked him the reason for the expedition north of Wall, he said that he wanted to find giants and children of the forest, like he said everyone else. After all, he couldn't tell them about magic, heart trees, and him being a wizard. So, he didn't care if they all laughed at him from his back. When the time comes, he will have the last laugh. The next day, he and his men began their march to the wall again. And after another fortnight, they finally arrived at the wall. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, he said with a stoic voice. Lord Bolton, the leader of the Night's Watch, replied in an equally stoic manner. I see that you've prepared well for your expedition north of the wall. That I have. And I also brought gifts for you. Gifts? Jeor Mormont asked. Yes, he said, and gave an order to the men as they started bringing forth carts upon carts filled with food, weapons, furs, and gold. 200 swords made of frost steel, a new type of steel that is sharper and more durable than castle-forged steel, he said as he removed the cloth from the first cart and showed the swords to the old man, whose eyes gleamed with surprise as he picked up one of the swords and swung it around a few times. It's a good sword, Jeor Mormont admitted after a moment. A very good sword. Sir, Alistair, have the recruits take these swords to the armory, Jeor Mormont commanded, and a disgruntled-looking middle-aged man started ordering some young recruits to do as was ordered by the Lord Commander. Next is furs and blankets for the men of the Night's Watch. He said as more carts came forward that were filled with 500 fur coats and 100 blankets. That is too much. Thank you for the contribution, my lord, Gior Mormont said as he looked at all the black fur coats and the blankets in shock. We're not finished yet, he said as the men led 70 more carts inside the gates of Castle Black. I heard that you have 1,000 men in all the wall. These carts have enough grain to last you for 2 whole years, after which my house will continue to send you the food that you require each year. You'll do that for us? What? Gior Mormont asked with shock as he had no idea about the bumper harvest in the Bolton lands. Because I can, he replied simply, and it was the truth. With the large amount of food that the Bolton lands were generating, he now had enough food at his disposal. Sparing enough food for the Night's Watch was like chump change for him. And last but not the least, he gave a motion, and Raxa came forward with a giant chest on her shoulder before she carefully put it down on the ground in front of him. He could already hear the men from the Night's Watch murmuring about Raxa's height, and he tuned them out easily. After all, with her height, Raxa would pull the attention of people anywhere she went. There was no denying that fact, so it was better for them to get used to such unwanted attention. Ahem. He coughed, and Lord Commander Gior Mormont, who was also looking at Raxa in shock, which was making her uncomfortable, looked back at him and then rubbed his eyes before going back to his stoic expression. Last but not the least, he said, and opened the chest to show gleaming gold to the old man, whose jaw opened once again at the sight of so much gold. 10,000 gold dragons for any and all supplies that I was not able to bring to you. By now he realized that the entire Castle Black had gone silent, and everyone was looking at him with shock, admiration, and awe. After all, he doubted that they had ever received such large donations from anyone in living memory. That is, Gior Mormont rubbed his eyes, which had become a little wet from happiness. Thank you, my lord. Thank you very much. The old man took his hands and bowed in front of him. The Night's Watch thanks you for your contribution. And that was how he introduced himself to the men of the Night's Watch. From there on, persuading them to open the gates so that his 1,000 men could pass through and go on their expedition was a simple task. He might not have needed to donate so much gold to these men to get them to open the gates, but if he found what he wanted in the north, then he would definitely need their goodwill, or they would not allow him to enter back in through the wall. Imagine that he was coming to the wall from the true north with giants, children of the forest, wargs, and beasts like direwolves. Would any stranger open their doors and invite him into their castle? No sane man would do that. So, he had to build a strong relationship with Lord Commander and the men of Night's Walk. He knew he couldn't build that kind of relationship on trust, so he chose to build on interest. Bolton House was now the biggest sponsor of the wall, and he knew that people wouldn't upset their sponsor if they didn't have to. Some of them might change their loyalty from their lord or their people to their sponsor for interests. Like Minister Fugue from his past life, there were very few things that man wouldn't do as long as Lucius Malfoy told him to do. They nearly lost the war even before it began because Minister Fudge didn't want to accept the reality. The man declared everyone who said that Voldemort is back his personal enemy. That fucker. Anyway, it was not the time to reminisce about the past. They had a mission, and to complete it, they had to go to the true north. Verimer looked at the large group of men while hiding behind thick foliage along with his 3 direwolves and a shadow cat. These men were not like anything he had seen before. At first, when he had seen them, he had thought that they were Thens. After all, only Thens would be able to muster such a large group and then give them proper gear, food, and weapons to venture into these areas. But that theory was proven wrong when he observed them for a while. Their clothes were different than any other that he had seen before. They were far too clean to belong to any free folk clan, and their weapons were not the bronze and wood that were used by Thens, but made of steel instead. Their way of talking and their manners were also different than any other clan that he had seen before. And last but not least, these men were far too disciplined to belong to any free folk clan. All this evidence clearly told him that these men were not from the true north, but had come from the south instead. But these men were not crows, as crows wore black clothes, and these men wore white from top to bottom. a color that helps hide them in these lands rather easily. So, who were these men, and what were they doing so close to his territory? His direwolf and its two companions suddenly heard footsteps coming from a distance and became alert at once as a group of 4 men rode on horses and went past the foliage where his direwolves were hiding without seeing them. He knew what these men were doing. He had already dealt with a pair of scouts yesterday by attacking and killing them before they could shout for help. That was probably why there were more scouts roaming around the camp today. He was sure that he and his direwolves would not be able to kill the 4 of them without them alerting the others. And once they shout for help, the people in the camp will know that someone is attacking them and will go on an alert. A pity that he didn't have enough men and women that would be able to fight these men. As of now, he only had 1,200 people in the villages under him, of which only 700 of them were capable of fighting. But those 700 fighters didn't have any decent weapons, armor, discipline, or the training required to fight an army like this. So, if he decided to attack these Southrons, then he'd only be leading his people to a slaughter. So, it would be wise to stay away from them for the time being. Perhaps he'll be able to ask Weeper for help and make an alliance with that fool. The thought of asking anyone for help displeased him, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Maybe he even would talk with the Vans for a change. After all, these men were equipped with a lot of weapons. Weapons that any man or woman in the true North would risk their life to get them. It was likely that by allying with the Vans, he'd only get a small portion of these weapons, or even none at all. But it would be better than having such a large army in his backyard. He turned around just in time to see his last direwolf falling to the ground before his shadow cat snarled, and started climbing a tree faster than any one man would ever be able to climb. Then a red light hit her, and she went stiff for a moment before her body went slack and she fell to the ground. He looked at his 4 most trusted companions and felt his heart freeze before he looked up and found a young boy with a white bird on his shoulder, pointing a thin branch at his shadow cat. The sight was so surreal that he was not able to understand what he was seeing for a time. A boy had brought down his 3 direwolves and shadow cat with the help of magic. "Are you the children of the forest?" he asked, showing more boldness than he actually felt. "No, my name is Bolton," the boy replied, "and you're the one they call Vermeer Fiveskins. I don't see your snow bear beside you. My snow bear is too huge and too loud for scouting," he said. He had no idea why he was so freely giving away that bit of information to a stranger, but decided not to think too much about it. "I see," the boy said before he pointed a stick upward, and a loud bang resonated from it, making him close his ears as he wondered what the boy was trying to do. Then he realized that the boy had called for his scouts and probably intended to capture him, as well as his direwolves and shadow cat. Seeing that his 4 animals were not going to wake up anytime soon, he decided to make a run for it. However, he was not able to run very far before a red light struck him and everything went black. Somewhere in the true North. POV of Bolton. "Thank you for helping me to find them, Hedwig," Domeric said, while giving Hedwig some pieces of bacon that he took out from his bottomless pouch. 2 of his scouts were killed yesterday. He tried to find the living beings around the camp with magic, but he only found small animals. The enemy was experienced and didn't approach the camp. He could increase his search perimeter, but that would take too much time. So, he used a different method. He searched the perimeter of the camp with Hedwig while warging into her. Hedwig was now his bounded familiar, and she had some new abilities. Thanks to the symbol of Deathly Hallows, or with another name, his altar tattoo of sacrifice. When he got Hedwig as a reward after his first sacrifice to his tattoo, Hedwig drank some blood from the wound on his finger, and the soul bounded to him, like the other 2 gray items he got. Because she was soul-bound to him, their bond from the past improved even more, and she became his soul-bound familiar. And thanks to their new bond, he could warging into her now and could control her, saw what she could see. Moreover, his warging was a perfect one. He didn't lose control of his body when warging like other wargs. Well, it was a bit disorienting at first to gain control of the second body, but he got used to it with little practice. She also gained the ability to apparate after her resurrection, and she could also hear her name when he called her regardless of distance, like house elves from his past life. So, with her new abilities and his familiar warging, he easily found the Vermeer. She was one of the indispensable members of this expedition, there was no doubt that. After a while, his men reached his location and took the Vermeer and his animal companions to the camp. When they arrived at the camp, they were met by Bolton and told him about the situation and Vermeer. "So this is a real warg?" Bolton asked as he looked at the unconscious man with an impassive gaze. "He doesn't look anything special." His men knew that he could warg into Hedwig, so they thought that he was a warg. But he told them he was not a real warg and could only warg into Hedwig because of their special bond. "That's because he's just as human as you or me," he explained as Raxa dragged the last direwolf and put it inside the cage along with the others. "The only difference he has from other humans is the fact that he is able to control animals with his mind. Nothing else. The dire wolves are so cute. Can I have one as well, Dami?" Raxa asked as she closed the wooden door of the cage and looked at him hopefully. "I don't think you'll be able to control a dire wolf, Raxa," he said with a smile, "but if you want one for yourself, then I'll try to find another one for you. But you can't take those as they belong to Vermeer over here." "They belong to him?" Raxa asked while pointing at the unconscious man. "So, if I kill him, then can I take his wolves?" she asked innocently, and he held the urge to facepalm himself. "You may not kill him, Raxa. He has use for me, and you cannot take his wolves either. As I said, I'll get another one for you," he said with some exasperation as Raxa pouted at his words while Bolton and some of his men snickered at him before he leveled them with a glare. "If you're done laughing, then make some fortifications as we'll be staying here for some time," he ordered. "Also send out some men to forage and food supplies that we might find in these parts along with the wildlings that we captured. The longer our food supply lasts, the better it'll be for us." Bolton gave him a nod and went away to follow his orders. Then he looked at Vermeer, whom he had heard about from his other wildling prisoners, and wondered if his compulsion charms would work on the man. Somewhere further in the true north. POV of Domeric Bolton. It's been a whole moon since we came north of the wall, and we've not seen any giants so far, nor any children of the forest that you claim still exist somewhere in his hellhole, my lord. Bolton complained as he sat quietly inside the tent as a fierce storm raged outside. The men are starting to become restless, especially because we're so far from home and have no one else to rely on in case we were attacked by any large wildling war party. We still have some way to go in order to reach our destination, he said while wondering why he didn't take his time to make a tent with expendable space for himself. Unfortunately, he had been so busy building a plumbing system with a hot shower and sinks and setting up a modern-day toilet with flush, as well as other such luxuries for himself in Dreadfort, that he forgot about making a magical tent. Oh well, that'll teach him to put his duties before luxuries. For now, he'll just have to sit inside a normal tent like the rest of his men. Give or take a few days, not a week. Don't worry, we're close to our destination, he assured the man who looked skeptical but accepted his words. Bolton was after all one of the few men and women within his inner circle who knew about his magical abilities. "How long do you think this storm would last?" Bolton asked, and he shrugged in return. "I'm a wizard, not a seer. Green seer." Vermeer spoke from the side as he snuggled closer to his snow bear due to the cold. "Green seer. That's what we call people who are able to see everywhere and everything," Briar said from the side as she sat beside her shadow cat and watched them warily. It has been a few days since they captured Briar and her shadow cat. She was a warg, but unlike Vermeer, she was only able to warg in a single shadow cat and was still wary of him and his group. But she was also curious like a cat, and he knew that she was no danger to his group as she wanted to see what he and his magic could do. Plus, he had promised both her and Vermeer a better life, and that he'd be able to increase their mental capacity with his magic, which would allow them to warg in more animals. Any warg worth his salt would know how important it was for wargs to have more animals within their control. Vermeer himself had become the chieftain of 5 villages because of his ability to warg into 5 different animals. So, no warg would be able to refuse his offers. He just hoped that he would be able to find more wargs to take south with him once they went back to their own castle. "How's your old tongue, Tormund?" Mance asked as their party climbed the hill. Despite what he wanted to believe, he was not young anymore and tired more easily these days. Regardless, he had a duty to his people, a duty to unite them all together and get them behind the wall before the end of this summer. And he gave his everything for this duty, for his people, as bad as it was yesterday. Why don't you ask the then boy instead? Tormund asked in a disgruntled tone. I would, but where's the fun in that? Mance said and let out a chortle as Tormund simply shook his head. On any other day, Tormund would have participated in the banter, but right now he was feeling too fearful to do such a thing. After all, it was not every day that you decided to enter a cavern filled with giants in order to talk with them about an alliance. If the giants didn't like them, then they might just squish them all like a red paste. Tormund knew that despite people calling him Giantsbane, he had never killed a single giant in his entire life. And he seriously doubted that he would be able to do so if the giants decided to kill them in their caverns. Is Tormund Giantsbane fearful of the giants? Mance asked with an amused expression, and Tormund felt his irritation rise at being baited like that. Little did he know that Mance Rayder was only trying to annoy him in order to deal with his own fear. After all, the only tribe that had any connections with the giants was the Vens. Aside from them, all other humans who encountered the giants were either ignored or died. As their group reached the clearing where some of the mammoths were lying around near the fire camp, they realized that there were no giants in the camp at all. The situation was a bit strange for them, and Mance Rayder wondered if they were about to be ambushed. But giants were not known for their intelligence, and they were definitely not known for ambushing the free folk. So they went toward the cave with a large entrance and heard loud voices coming from inside as they walked forward. But as they continued to walk forward, the voices coming from inside the cave continued to rise until the voices rose to such high levels that Mance was sure that some kind of fight was taking place inside the cave. He had never really heard of giants fighting each other and wondered what such a thing would mean for his own cause. Well, he'll just have to wait and see. Are we going in there? Tormund asked as he marched forward, and he could see the clear apprehension and fear in his friend's eyes. But Mance nodded nonetheless and hoped that Tormund didn't see the fear in his own eyes as he marched forward to the cave. But before he entered the cave, they all heard a loud thud, like something large had fallen to the ground, and the cave went silent, as if all the giants inside the cave died at once. And to Mance Rayder, this silence was far more unnerving than the earlier loud arguments. Did giants have a very good sense of smell that they smelled them in their camp and stopped fighting themselves? Frankly, he had no idea, but he wanted to know. So he forced his legs to move, entered the cave, and froze at the sight in front of him. Because in front of him was a large cavern that was filled with about 80 or so giants who were sitting around in a circle. In the middle of the circle was a giant that looked to be even larger than the other giants, but the giant was currently lying down on the floor. And on the shoulder of the giant was a young 8 or 10-year-old boy in exotic white clothes with a branch in his hand as he stared at the rest of the giants with an imperious gaze. They were all bowing to this boy, and as Mance watched all this happening in front of him, there was only one question running through his mind. What the fuck was going on here? Giant's Cave in the True North. POV of Domeric Bolton. When Domeric Bolton went to the cave in order to talk with the giants and their leader, he had never thought he would become their leader by the end of their talks. It was only later that he found out that the giants were not as smart as humans. And despite their thick skins, they did not have even a fraction of the magical resistance that the giants or trolls of his own original world did. So, when he cast the compulsion charms and loyalty charms over them after defeating their leader by operating over his shoulder and casting 5 stunners on his head, the charms along with his show of might by easily defeating their chief worked a little too well, and they proclaimed him to be their new chief. The whole thing was rather strange when he thought about it. Regardless, he had finally achieved what he wanted. The fact that he met a group of wildlings right after his coronation as their chief was a strange sight, as wildlings usually don't associate with giants. The fact that their group leader was a former member of the Night's Watch was even stranger. But as strange as the whole day had turned out to be, he still offered bread and salt to the men once he went back to his camp, and allowed them to talk with him. And the day turned even stranger.